JLF's Brave New World welcomes you back to the second session of the day. Those of you who missed our earlier session, the Ramcharitramanas, Pavan K. Varma and Shashi Tharoor in conversation, and all our other sessions featuring a stellar list, including Chumpa Lahiri, Nobel laureates Professor Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo, Orhan Pamuk, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Anne Applebaum, Edmund de Waal, Barkhadat, Neil Ferguson, and so many others. You can watch them on our Facebook page, JLF Litfest, and on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. Our official radio partner is Red FM, Bajate Raho. Our next session for the day is Monsoon Ragas, the music of the rains. Katherine Butler Schofield and Vidya Shah in conversation. Every season is celebrated in India through its poetry, music, and art. As the rain clouds spread their shadows, acclaimed music historian Dr. Katherine Butler Schofield, an accomplished vocalist and writer, Vidya Shah speak of the power and splendor of the Monsoon Ragas and the stories and emotions behind them. Katherine Butler Schofield is a historian of Mughal India and Hindustani music at King's College London. Her latest book is Monsoon Feelings, a history of emotions in the rain with Margaret Perno and Imke Rajamani. Vidya Shah is a composer and musician initially trained in Carnatic music and later received guidance in the North Indian genres of Khayal, Thumri, Dadra, and Ghazal. She writes and speaks in music and is the author of Jalsa, Indian Women's Journey from the Salon to the Studio. Please do remember to comment and ask questions by typing it into the comment section. In case any of you drop off due to bandwidth issues, you can find us on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF, and of course, if we drop off, hang in there, we'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, Monsoon Ragas, music of the rains. Katherine Butler Schofield and Vidya Shah.
Thank you, Sanjay, for leading us into what will hopefully be a pleasant ride through this next session. So, घनन घनन घन घिर आई बदरा घन घन घोर कारी छाए बदरा. Sounds familiar. Or if you prefer, कारे बादर ओलर आए बदरिया कारी रे गरजे घोर बरसे जोर दामिनी कौंद चौंद जागी से जरिया आई रे. So many possibilities, right? You think monsoon, there's joy, there's celebration, there's just a breath of fresh air. And I think a lot of it also has to do with how we've grown up with some of these ideas and how immediately it brings to mind, these feelings, these emotions. Katherine, I am actually a little curious about, for someone who lives in England, I'd be interested to know, what does the monsoon mean to you?
Sure. And namaste ji, everybody, and adab, and hello to wherever you are listening and watching to this anywhere in the world. And thank you so much for those beautiful notes. If we're lucky, I understand that the monsoon rains have not yet come in Delhi. Is that right, where you're coming from? Okay, but it has...
Not yet.
Perhaps your beautiful voice will bring the rains. So I guess I live in England, and as those of you who know England will know, it does rain here a lot, but it's kind of cold and not very heavy rain. But in fact, I grew up in Brisbane in Australia, where I was born. And I was actually born during the Great Brisbane Flood of 1974. And now you all know how old I am. And my father tells me that they actually had to drive through floodwater to get me to the hospital, or my mother to the hospital. And I think some of that stormwater must have got in my veins somehow, because I grew up with summers that were hot and wet with a really big afternoon thunderstorm, and these huge clouds that would roll in off the sea and stack really high, and everything would get very windy, and everything that had been really humid and hot would suddenly get still. And there's something about the atmosphere that joins the human body to the natural world in those really heightened storm moments. And so when I've been in India and traveling in India, actually the monsoon is my favorite season. And I have very, very fond memories of being in Udaipur just after a very lovely friend of mine, an Indian friend of mine, had passed away, sadly. And I was the only person in my hotel. It was a huge hotel and there was nobody else there. But looking out over Lake Pichula, it was absolutely beautiful, with the most gorgeous skies and the most amazing sunsets and the most beautiful smells and the wildlife. I had this little green parrot come and sit on my balcony and befriend me. And, you know, in my imagination, I wondered whether this was my friend's soul as he passed, telling me not to worry, you know, that, you know, this separation is only temporary, you know. So really,
very, very, well, it's a very intense story, and it's also, I think, very reflective of how emotional it can mean for us, and at such at a very personal level as well. And I find it particularly interesting that how it's actually a cultural construct. If you look at how we react to monsoon, how we react to the beauty of water entering our lives, and the sheer anticipation of it is another, you know, it's another beautiful phenomenon itself. So given that it's you know, that it's so culturally specific, it's so subjective, it has such a cognitive, emotional, affect aspect to it, yet it shows up practically in every period, every century, you know, of history, and historically through texts, through you know, different reigns, through emperors, through nawabs, through, you know, through the Vedas. What is it about the reigns that makes it so enduring and so sort of attractive and impels you to engage with it?
Yeah, I mean, there are other really attractive times of the year as well. I'm thinking particularly of Basant and the spring and Holi and so on. But I think it is the sheer drama of the season. But I think also it has to do with the importance of it to Indian survival and livelihood. So people's survival, their very physical survival, depends on the right amount of rain. If you get too little rain in the monsoon, then your crops won't grow and your family will starve. If you get too much rain, you're going to get flooded and washed out of your home, and so on. So you need the right amount of rain. And the economy really, really depends on that. But it's also a really, really important time for the fertility of nature. And I think, you know, this is part of the whole life cycle, and the cycle of the year feeds into the life cycle of humans and other animals and plants. And so you get all these wonderful metaphors in the poetry and the paintings and the films and so on of birds in particular. So
that's the interesting thing. I mean, I was going to ask you that next, because you know, as you rightly pointed out, in terms of how it is so intrinsically connected to how we survive, but also how it translates into an aesthetic, you know, and how it becomes this beautiful imagery, and how that imagery actually creates this beautiful atmosphere. Of course, there is love, longing, there is beauty, but there's also restlessness, there's also separation. So it really provides for such a tapestry, such a weave of possibilities. And I you know, I'm particularly fascinated with how across time several patrons have engaged with the aesthetic of how to present the idea of monsoon, whether it's visually or whether it's through the raga or in the lyrical space.
Yeah. So thinking about monsoon ragas and about the melodies of the monsoon, there are so many different song genres over the years, so many performed genres that have encapsulated the monsoon through very striking visual imagery, through sonic imagery as well. And I've just got a couple of examples which I thought I'd share. And of course, we can go right back to Kalidasa and to Meghdut and that beautiful poetry which can be sung. And I mean, it sounds beautiful just when it's recited, but I think when you add the monsoon ragas to the sound, it stimulates more emotions and more senses somehow. But this one is perhaps from a slightly unexpected quarter, and it's from the great ghazal poet, Persian ghazal poet of India, Amir Khusro.
Wow.
Who, of course, we know as the devotee of the great saint Hazrat Nizamuddin Chishti, but of course was also a courtier for the Delhi Sultans. And this one is really beautiful. So it's just a couple of lines. When the sun moved into Cancer, the zodiacal sign Cancer. So when the sun moved into Cancer, the sun's eyes, like a wellspring, filled with water. Clouds covered everything above. Vegetation set up its troops on the plains. Water poured over the earth, which made its dust settle. The flood of clouds passed so rapidly that the chains of wind did not get a glimpse. I mean, and I can see in my mind's eye, standing on one of the old forts in Delhi and looking out over the dusty plain and having these clouds roll in as the sun moves into the sign of Cancer, heralding the beginning of the monsoon months. It's in Persian, but it also evokes absolutely where he is there. But the other ones are all these amazing poems, and I'd love you to if you could, to sing a little bit more after I read this one about that use the sound of the monsoon in the metaphors, but also in the language. And I'm going to be reading these in English, so this is inadequate. But this one is from a Baramasa, so a 12-month poem. So it's from the point of view of the Virahini, the heroine whose lover has gone away, and she wants him back. And it's written by a poet called Mubarak, a 17th century poet from Bilgram in Braj Bhasha. Clouds beat the Nagara drums. Waterways give the beat. Cicadas play the cymbals. Black bees blow the bugle. Cuckoos coo the alap. Blue jays play the dances. The wind blows the flute. The chatak taps the gourd. Fireflies, says Mubarak, are pearls in the vessel of the night that restless girls have lit on four sides. My beloved is abroad, bringing fresh pain. The monsoon has brought me tidings of viraha. These fantastic use of sounds, but I know there's so much in the repertoire of so many Hindustani songs that repeat the sound. So I'd love to hear some. I'm sure everybody else would love to hear some.
Yeah, so I mean, like you said, the idea of how the lyric also explains or adds to the drama of monsoon, and it shows up in either in the peacock dancing or the the frog jumping out of a pond, or it could be more in terms of the lightning or the robust cloud, or how that plays out, how that energy plays out in a composition. Typically in Hindustani music, particularly in classical music, Malhar has a very special place. Malhar or Monsoon Ragas have a very, very special place, as you would know. And there have been several compositions which are attributed to this particular period of the year. And like you said, there we do celebrate the Shad Ritu, 6 seasons, and of that, it's the Basant and the Malhar which gets more importance than some of the others like Hemant or Shishir or Sharad or whatever it is that you have. So there are many compositions which are directed at celebrating the monsoon, and I like to sing one which is particularly interesting because it combines 2 ideas. One, the fact that it is set in a rag or a melody called Miyaki Malhar. So Miyaki Malhar means Miya Tansen. So the fact that he was the one who Tansen, was the one who is supposedly have come up with this kind of a malhar, and in that again, a later poet, Niyamat Khan, who was in the court of Muhammad Shah Rangile and has been, he has several compositions to his credit with Sadarang as his pen name. So he celebrates his patron through a composition of Miyaki Malhar. So I will, of course, there's no tabla and all that, so I will try and do whatever I can because I think particularly for Malhar, a little bit of drama with rhythm would have helped, but we shall.
Instinct to tell.
The other thing about these malhars is how the meend or the glide adds to it a little more feeling. The idea of meandering through a space which is looking for this rain to come and probably hit across your face and lighten up your day or whatever it is that you want to call it. Mohammad Shah Rangile re Balaman, Mohammad Shah Rangile re Balaman, tum bin main kari badariya nitna suhaye, Mohammad Shah Rangile re Balaman, तुम बिन मैं कारी बदरिया नित न सुहाए, मोहम्मद शाह रंगील रे बलम, उमड़ घुमड़ घन घटा घुमड़ घुमड़ घन घटा छाई, नैना झरी लगाए तरजा, सदा रंगीले को सदा रंगीले को सुखदाए, चमक बीजा झराए, मोहम्मद शाह रंगील रे बलम.
Wow, so beautiful, and so it's so wonderful to hear Sadangila's composition too, and you can really hear in the way that's constructed how the clouds build and circle, and then there's this huge, when you do your fast akartans that
there's a build up to the robustness of this energy which needs to burst.
Yeah.
The idea of Malhar is really like, and I mean, for all our viewers, just to say that, there are ideas, there are very specific ideas as to why these compositions or these bandishes or the poetry therein is very, very, it's very evocative, and one of the things that, Katherine, that you and I had earlier also talked about was how it translates into the visual, not just metaphorically, but, the ragamalikas, or, how the ragamalas, and how it plays out in so many more ways. And therefore, it's a very composite experience. Yeah.
Oh yeah, so very much so. If you're thinking about early modern India, so the Rajput courts or the courts of the Marathas or the Mughal court, during the monsoon they had all the arts there, and all the arts built onto each other. So if you think about a rag, like the rag that I've been working on, which is an old rag which no longer exists, but it's related to Miyanki Malhar. It's very close to it. It's a rag called Gond. And this particular rag, it's a feminine raga, so it's called a ragini. And she is depicted in these incredibly beautiful paintings as a woman who is alone in a grove of trees, extremely beautiful trees, with huge monsoon clouds beginning to circle overhead. And she's sitting on lotus blossoms, and she is about to feed a number of birds. And somewhere here, I have a description of a painting that is in Brajbhasha prose. It's from 18th century Jaipur. And this inscription is actually written on the painting. So you get the Brajbhasha poetry and the painting, and probably you could sing this, you could then sing this. So Gond is an impassioned, exquisite woman. She holds the thought of her distant lover tenderly in her heart. Sitting with the one source of her love before her, which is a letter from her lover, she reads aloud the words inscribed upon her heart. Her friends play beside her. So in this particular painting, there's a couple of Sakhis, her friends, with her, but they're not enough. With sweet notes, they sing of the thrills of happiness. So we actually have music entering this poem. When she hears word of her lover's approach, her body blooms and her bliss thunders. She decks herself in a special colourful dress and watches the road in every direction. Gond is an impassioned woman, beautiful in her desire, completely devoted to her lord. Her soul knows of the approach of her lover. The flower of her body burns. Which is just exquisite. And one of the things that I've been trying to do with this rag is to establish what its emotional mood was. And we get a really good idea about this from the many, many compositions that were actually written in Rag Gond. It seems to have been the most popular rag at the court of Shah Alam II, who was a descendant of Muhammad Shah Rangila. And it seems that Gond represented... Sorry?
No, I'm just saying that, your work on Shah Alam and the fact that, here is an emperor who, given his physical limitations, despite that, is so prolific in his expression of, use of Braj, use of Farsi, different languages, and the idea of using Gond to celebrate the monsoon. It's just it's so rich, really.
Yeah.
This sense of abandon and engagement with the aesthetic.
Oh yeah, and for those of you who don't know, Shah Alam II, the emperor who was on the throne of Delhi from 1759 to 1806 when he died. ostensibly. In fact, he was booted off by Abdali, and then the Marathas took over as his protector, and then the British finally came and took Delhi in 1803. So he wasn't emperor of anything, but he was an exquisite poet and musician, and he had some of the best musicians and poets at his court, including Khaja Mirdad, the sons and nephews of Sadarangji and Adarangji, who you've probably heard of if you're into Indian classical music. And he himself wrote in Braj, in Urdu, in Persian, exquisite poetry and songs. And we have 700 of his songs, all of which have rag names and tal names, and which could come back into fashion. And so he wrote these songs, and he wrote these songs for a very specific place. He wrote them for Mehroli and for the pleasure gardens of the Mughal emperors just south of Delhi. And you can imagine maybe a courtesan singing one of his songs in the person of Gond Malhar, a courtesan who becomes Gond Malhar, who becomes this Virahini waiting for her lover to arrive, and who sings Shah Alam's lyrics in the pleasure gardens at Mehroli. So you have all the senses here, plus the atmosphere of the monsoon, of the natural world, and of all those things in the poems and the songs. They're present. The peacocks, the chatak bird, which is the pied-crested cuckoo that in mythology only drinks rainwater, the hawk cuckoo, the pepiha, the flamingos flying overhead, all of these things, all there, amazing. I wish we could recreate it.
A couple of things which I find fascinating in this narrative is how, for example, references to Dadur, Mor, Papiha, all of this also exists from before. If you look at Bhakti poetry, for example, there's so much of, if you allow me to sing a couple of lines of Mirabai.
Please.
Ritu aayi bole murare, murare ritu aayi bole murare, dadur mor papiha bole, dadur mor papiha bole, koyal kar rahi shora re, ritu aayi bole murare, उत्तर दिशा से आई बदरिया, उत्तर दिशा से आई बदरिया, बरसत है घन घोरा रे, ऋतु आई बोले मोरा दे. So you have references to the kind of imagery that you're talking about in Shah Alam's work. But what is also fascinating is that his own version of Gond might not exist. But God Malhar is it's such an important form of Malhar in the North Indian tradition. And also, historically, it has existed even before Miyan Ki Malhar, they say.
Yeah,
And also how God Malhar has been adapted or has transgressed or has been, adopted by some folk musicians.
Yeah.
So in some of their renditions, the Langas and the Manganiyars, who also sing, a lot of the Bhakti repertoire, they sing songs where they talk about Jhir Mir Barse Meghre, and even though they are singing it perhaps in a rag that we as in classical musicians would refer to as a Brindavani Sarang, they want to call it the God Malhar. So clearly there is something about the idea of God, and it's so beautiful what you said about her feminine form, which I think also lends to the whole sort of the beauty or the emotion of the moment.
Yeah. I mean, it's just this incredibly powerful moment of the meeting of the earth and sky, I think, that you have with Gond. But also, I mean, you're so right that these metaphors and these images go right back to folk poetry. So if you look at the Dholamaru traditional story from Rajasthan, which goes back, at least 600, probably longer than that, years in the oral traditions, there is Rag Meg, there is Rag Gond. They're there in the Dolamara story. They're there in the Guru Granth Sahib. You know, they're everywhere. So folk tradition, devotional tradition, you know, there's something very powerful about these particular note sequences which just remind us orally of the sound of the monsoon, the feel of the monsoon. I have a beautiful poem, if I may, which translated by Richard Williams, which is by the Radha Vallabhi saint poet Vrindavan Das, who died in 1787 in Vrindavan. And this one is about Radha and Krishna, of course, and their love play during the monsoon. So, they are playing in the grove now, my friend. Come beside me and watch. The grove has settled in the sky. The wind has borne love aloft. The fair and the dark tumble down in embrace. Oh, these clouds are raining down ras. Overwhelming delight crashes down like driving rain. Her ornaments thunder wildly. Strands of her hair spread out elegantly like clouds, raining loosened flowers like giant raindrops. Against his dark limbs, her pale body is electric, like hidden, glaring lightning. How fine are her hands, tender as new shoots, sprouting higher with the desire of body and heart. This is not the whole poem; it's a long poem. But I love this idea that the thunder of the season enters Radha. Radhaji, and that you know in also in you know the Rajput poem that goes with Rag Gond, it enters the Ragini. The thunder enters the Ragini. It's you know it's this very much uniting of earth and sky, of people and nature, which is really so important and profound, I think.
And, you know, speaking of uniting people and nature and the sky and the earth, it's also beautiful how it meanders into the semi-classical space, you know, the whole, there's another world of the Tumri and the Kajri, and of course the Jhula, which I think it's the Jhula itself, or the swing, you know, which is such a beautiful metaphor of this communion between the earth and the sky, and how the breeze sort of you know wafts across your body and your face, and while you feel this meeting of the sky and the earth, and it's also a way of you know, for women particularly, which is where the genre really the sub-genre really evolved from, sort of taking a break from your excruciating or your mundane or your banal chores, to sort of experience that moment of calm, to experience that moment of peace, where you actually could be transported into another space altogether. So I think the way music and poetry has, in a very considered way, dealt with not just many aspects of our lives, like you pointed out about livelihood or about our own struggles, but also finding that inner peace and love, and to allow to deal with longing and restlessness. What do you say?
Yeah, I think this is actually really the case, and I'm you know, I'm thinking actually of the image of the bower of Radha and Krishna's bower, that they, you know, they shelter under, you know, a bower when it's all raining around, and how that sort of metamorphosizes, that's not a word, metamorphoses into an umbrella in the Hindi cinema. So, you know, you have all these iconic film stills of the hero and the heroine under the umbrella while everything pours down on them, or of running through the rain and getting absolutely soaked. And, you know, something like the famous Rim Jim Kiri Savan with Amitabh Bachchan and Moshimi, and running through Bombay as it was then, you know, and all those iconic, you know, Bombay moments in the rain. And I'm thinking of all our friends in Bombay at the moment, in Mumbai, who are struggling with with this rain. Yeah.
Speaking of which, I think it's time for us to take a few questions,
Sure.
Catherine. There's one from Sachdev Ramakrishna, and he asks, Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony and Vivaldi's Four Seasons evoke a different mood compared with Kalidasa's Meghaduta.
Mm.
Why might that be?
That's a really good question. And certainly with Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony, it's this it's number 6. It's an early 19th century piece. And this is sort of post-Enlightenment, really. And it's a moment in which Beethoven is seeking to portray the countryside that he sees around him in Germany through musical means. So there is that section where there is a thunderstorm. And in my previous life as an orchestral musician, I actually played all of the Beethoven symphonies, but number 6 is the one I played the most. So there's this fantastic thunderstorm, which then kind of clears away. And you can actually, there are some similarities there between how that kind of weather is depicted in the symphony and how it's depicted in a Tumri or in a Drupad particularly, which is much more kind of heavy and more thundery, I think. If you go back to Vivaldi, that's 17th century or early 18th century, actually. And they're operating on a very similar understanding of how the emotions work to people in India at the time, that the music was associated with the elements of the natural world and the humors of the body. But it was expressed very differently. So if you listen to something like Winter, it doesn't really sound very wintry, but that's because they weren't trying to depict in kind of really obvious filmic ways what the seasons were. And again, it's going to be an Italian winter, which is going to be very different from an Indian winter. So, but it's a really fantastic question.
Right. Then there's another one about, could you tell us about music and its ability to heal, especially in these stressful times? Are there any rag that you would suggest, any singers that you would recommend? Before you answer, I think I have to say that I'm so grateful to this series, this Jaila Brave New World, to have thought of bringing in this discussion on music, because so many people that I sent out this evening's invite to said that it's such a nice thing that we're going to be talking about music, because it's really such a balm to our stress in our stressful times. And I think we need to really fall back so much more on listening to music and poetry and that cultural space, because it's a great stress buster.
Yeah, it really is a great stress buster. And I actually think that, I mean, I don't know about where you are, Vijay, but here in England, musicians and actors and actresses are all suffering a great deal from the virus, because they can't actually perform. If you need to be in close proximity to somebody, you can't perform, and it's very difficult for them. And I've been listening to so much music in lockdown. It's been amazing, and really appreciating. Actually, I've been listening to Pandit Jasraj, who his older recordings, he's still wonderful. And I've been listening to Kishori Amankar. I do have a favorite rag performance of hers, which is Barka Beri Bhayo, which is in Gond Malha, which is just beautiful. And there's some really old recordings of God Sarang by Ghulam Ali Khan, which just bring me joy.
I mean, God Sarang has just so many beautiful interpretations. But I think I would also suggest that, in times like this, if music has to really bring you peace, and it has to bring you calm, it has to help you in dealing with stress, then perhaps it's also a subjective thing. Sometimes when you listen to quieter, slower music, which is, I think, also the purpose of the Bada Khayal, or the slower part of this very intense classical rendition. That's the role that it plays. It really is the languor which helps you calm down, which helps you breathe easier. And so my suggestion would be that, really reach out to any music that you enjoy, something that which will sort of give you that sense of peace. Perhaps it's not, it might not be in the direction of hip hop or rap, is all that I can say.
Although if that brings you peace, then, and I can also recommend that you listen quietly, and focus on what you're hearing, if you're trying to, sort of calm down from the stress, rather than listening while we've got lots of other things going on. I mean, I think that is something that we do. We just listen when we're working, or we listen when we're commuting, or whatever it happens to be. But actually to quietly, please. Yeah, just to sit quietly and to listen out for those spaces between the notes where there is actually peace and pausing, and things go on in between notes as well as in the main body of things.
Also, I mean, like we've just discussed, you read out a beautiful Amir Khusro. I mean, you can find your piece in a qawwali. You could find it in a film song, Rimajhim Gire Savan.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, it's really about finding that quiet time to listen to whatever it is that you want to. You have beautiful poems. Nazir Akbar Abadi says, "Hai is hawa mein barsat ki bahare." So it really depends on what is magical for you and what moves you. Very, very personal.
I think so.
There's another question.
Yes, please.
So what happens when it doesn't rain? Are there any rag that reflect drought and suffering?
Oh my goodness. Well, so this is actually where Monsoon Ragas come into their own, and actually tying into the last question about healing. If you want it, the listening to rags at the time they were supposed to be sung at. So listening to Malhar rags now, as we're going into the monsoon to try to bring the rains, or, at the right time of day, because they were actually designed by the Sanskrit pundits and by the Muslim ustads to heal at those specific times of day, to balance, to put the body back into balance. That's if you believe the principles of Ayurveda or of Unani medicine. So that's what they believed. And so listen to the rags at the right time. But also, I
do feel one thing though, that music is so intrinsically related to society. It's not something that we're doing in vacuum.
That's right.
The fact that a rag meant a certain thing or could evoke a certain kind of a not just an emotional response, but an environmental response. But we're dealing with so much more now. We're dealing with global warming. We're dealing with deforestation. We're dealing with all kinds of issues. So in that context, I mean, it may be a bit of an extrapolation to say that singing a Miyaki Malhar will actually bring the rain. And I'm saying this also because I don't want to say that artists are not doing well enough to bring the rain with the right that they should be singing, right? So, I don't think there is anything specifically for drought, but for suffering, yes, music is again, it's so therapeutic. It can be so cathartic. It can be so many things. So to that extent, yes, please do keep listening to music. And in these difficult times, I think it makes even more sense to do so.
Absolutely. And support artists too if they're struggling, because so many of them just have no income at the moment. And I don't know how you've been finding it, Vidya, with
I almost felt like you were speaking to me, Katherine.
Yeah.
But I mean, jokes apart, this is an excruciatingly difficult time. And most of us are, we believe in live performances. I mean, that's our life, really. And in the current circumstances, we don't know how that is going to pan out, what is going to be the new normal, really. And artists have been such important contributors to keep together the cultural heritage of not just a country but civilizations.
Yeah.
And they have been the flag bearers of history, of aesthetic, of so many things. And it would be improper, I think it would be utterly unfair to overlook the seminal contributions that we make in keeping society together. And therefore, I would really urge all of you all to also join in thinking about how we can keep the community together. There's so many artists, folk artists, who actually, for them, it's really hand-to-mouth existence, So for us, it's a very, very critical time, and support is absolutely imperative. And people like Sanjoy and teamwork, and there are some initiatives, but we really need so much more to hold all of this together, not just in India, but really across the world. We know what's happening in England. Theatres are closing down, orchestras, we don't know whether they can come back. So yes, it's a difficult time, and we have to keep supporting artists and respect their contributions, really.
That's right, because so many of us listen to music. We all do. And in fact, humans are the only species who make and listen to music and have something special that they call music. And it is universal to human beings. We all have some kind of music that we listen to. So it's clearly fundamental to who we are as humans. And that must continue somehow. And I mean, I think there'll be a lot of changes that we see after this time.
I think it's probably time, but before I hand it over to Sanjoy, I'm just going to sing two lines just to leave, with a positive thought, really. And this particular song is, it's in the semi-classical genre, and it says, Ambua ki chaiya mein, in the under a mango tree, let us bring in some mangal or some good wishes. Yeah. So just a couple of lines, Enjoy, before we go back to you. Ambua ki chaiya mein mangal gaaye, अम्बुआ की छैया में मंगल गाए, आओ सजनी सैया को मनाए, बरखा की रुत आई, अम्बुआ की छैया में मंगल गाए. Thank you, Katherine, and thank you, Teamwork, and Sanjoy and the entire team. We're so grateful to you to allow us to talk about music.
Yes, thank you very much, and lovely to see you all.
Thank you both so much, bringing poetry and music to our lives. It's extraordinary. And Catherine, actually, they say that dolphins too react beautifully and make their own music. And there's a whole new research now around dolphins making music in the deep.
Yeah, they sing beautifully. They sing beautifully, but what we don't know is whether they're talking or whether they're making music.
And I don't know whether you've seen the latest research that came out in Europe about the use of music in people with Alzheimer's specifically, and it was part of the the cultural ministers summit in Edinburgh last year, where the year before that, where they showed us the research. It was incredible. And they actually had a patient who had improved enormously in his violin. He was a maestro in his violin.
Yeah.
So we've seen how music has so many, as Vidya very specifically said. Of course, there's the beauty, and of course, it's the arts. But its contribution, the contribution of the arts around us is just incredible. And the sad thing is that we sometimes forget that for an artist or an artisan, one, not to perform or not to produce, and it's really, apart from being heartbreaking, is also the fact that if they don't perform and they don't sell their wares, they don't eat, and that in many ways is the reality of the situation. And 10, 20, 100 million people here in India, at least, dependent on the creative industries and the arts for either primary or secondary income. So thank you both. That was spectacular, and we're just getting so many comments about how peaceful and calming. And of course, the one question to you, Katherine, that I don't know whether Vidya received was, how is it that you're so well versed with Pandit Jasraj and with Kishori Amonkar, etc.? But maybe
Well,
we can do that for another time. Or if you have a minute, go right ahead.
And I was a Western classical viola player, and I played in an orchestra, and I really didn't enjoy it. I got bored, and I started listening to Hindustani music, and I fell in love. It's simple as that. I fell in love, and I've never looked back.
Well, thank you both. You truly made us feel the music, and thank you all for watching and being such a great audience. And thank you to our official radio partners, Red FM Bajate Raho. Please do remember to log in tomorrow, Saturday, the 20th of June, for a set of 2 great sessions at a new timing. So we have Good Omens, the celebrated Neil Gaiman, in conversation with Nilanjana Roy. Neil Gaiman is English author of short fiction, novels, comic books, graphic novels, audio theater, and films. He's also one of the most beloved and popular writers in India. Here he talks to Nilanjana Roy about his life and work and how he's surviving under the lockdown. And these are at our new timings, like we had today. It's at 7 p.m. Indian Standard Time, 2:30 p.m. British Summer Time, and 9:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And the second session on Saturday, the 20th of June, is celebrating Pride Month. We present The Lexicon of Love. Ruth Vanita and Sandeep Roy in conversation. Ruth Vanita has done groundbreaking work on gender, sexuality, and women's rights. She speaks to writer-journalist Sandeep Roy and author of Don't Let Him Know about her evocative new novel, Memory of Light on Same-Sex Love in the Last Century. Together, they discuss the impact of inclusive literature and plural readerships in the context of their own work and the wider canon of LGBTQ narratives. This is at 8:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time, 4 p.m. British Summer Time, and 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Have a lovely day, and see you all back tomorrow.